In a galaxy where the light of the Emperor barely pierces the dense darkness of treachery, war, and ambition, history holds many enigmas. Among the heroes whose names are etched in the annals of glory, there are those who chose the path of betrayal, placing their ambitions above duty. Their actions became fateful for their brothers, altering the fate of entire worlds and leaving scars on the very fabric of the Imperium. These individuals were not merely warriors or commanders, they embodied hope until they became symbols of loss. What could compel them to abandon what they defended? What did they desire more than brotherhood and loyalty? Today, we delve into the history of two legendary traitors to understand what can lead to the downfall of even the greatest. Ancient Terran wisdom states that within the depths of every heart lies a monster waiting for a reason to emerge. If a person is weak, this hidden monster uses its strength to cause pain to others, but if their spirit is strong, the energy of the monster can be tamed and used to achieve any goal. The difference between these two paths is only whether a person has the determination to continue battling their own dark side. But if a monster lurks in every human heart, is it possible that deep within every monster's soul lies a human? Today, the hero of our story is Iago Sevatarian, the ruthless first captain of the Night Lords, who acted according to a twisted sense of justice and inscribed his name in the history of the Imperium with blood. He was born on the lower levels of the hive world Nostramo, a grim planet that became the home of Primarch Conrad Kurz. The local society was ruled by criminal clans, and thus young Iago, like most of his peers, quickly found himself among the children used for the purposes of bandit groups. However, even the necessary obligation to interact with others did not affect the boy's character, who continued to remain withdrawn. He could not respect the opinions of strangers and take their directions seriously. He did not know how to make friends and did not want to get close to his peers. His mother hoped that once he grew up, Iago would change and then find a way to interact with people, but contrary to her words, this did not happen. In his early years, Sevatarian spent his free time in solitude, hiding from strangers' eyes on the rooftops of his home. Such behavior was caused not only by the desire to hide from people, but also by epileptic seizures and constant headaches that the boy was forced to suppress. He was tormented by the noise of desires and malice in the minds of others, the whispering of foreign feelings simmering beyond the eyes, and even the cawing of crows competing with each other for food. But worst of all were the memories of the dead flaring up on lifeless faces in the sewers, and the unseen whispering asking the boy to avenge. The excruciating noise of unknown voices drove the child to tears, and there was no one nearby who could explain that what was happening was merely a powerful psycho-gift that needed not to be suppressed, but mastered. Even after the young Sevatarian found himself among the Space Marines of the 8th Legion, the Night Lords, he did not attempt to become a librarian. He completely closed his mind off to the warp. However, it is believed that Sevatarian's remarkable abilities as one of the most dangerous masters of close combat partially stemmed from the psychic gift, likely allowing the warrior to anticipate his opponent's movements. The legionary did not desire this, but the subconsciously utilized psycho talent helped him run faster, kill more efficiently, and not feel fatigue like other Space Marines. Upon joining the ranks of the Night Lords, the gifted and to a greater extent ruthless Iago Sevatarian began a rapid ascendancy to the Legion's command ranks. Before long, he held the post of first captain and then led a squad of elite Terminators, personally marked by Conrad Kurz. The Primarch, with whom it was difficult for his other sons and brothers to interact, somewhat valued Sevatarian, stating that he liked the first captain for his unique sense of humor. Aside from Sevatarion's almost supernatural abilities as a duelist, his advantage in battle lay in the fact that he did not adhere to the codes of honor accepted in most other legions. In battles against warriors who strictly followed knightly codes, his cunning and to some deceitful behavior secured success as much as his combative talents. A vivid example of this was Sevatarion's duel with Sigismund, the first captain of the Imperial Fists. This confrontation occurred during one of the joint campaigns of the two legions, after the sons of Rogel Dawn deemed the actions of the Night Lords towards the inhabitants of a conquered planet unjustifiably brutal. The battle lasted 30 standard hours, during which Sigismund's skill nearly brought him victory. Yet Sevatar ended the duel by resorting to an unfair move. He struck the Templar's face with his head. A victory from such a blatant rule violation could not be counted, yet the battle with Sevatar broke Sigismund's streak of triumphal victories. Participating in the Great Crusade, Jago Sevatarion earned for himself fame no less than that of Rogel Dawn's champion, or even Ezekiel Abaddon of the Lunar Wolves. Like the other Night Lords to achieve his goals, the first captain preferred grim and ruthless actions. However, his merits were known throughout the Imperium. Equally renowned was his weapon, the chain glaive known as the Whisper of Night. Once in the past it belonged to Conrad Kurz, who discarded it as unnecessary. Sevatar discovered the glaive amidst the bloodied bodies in the Primarch's chambers and marvelled at its lethal power. The Whisper of Night was an elegant architect construction, and when activated, it emitted not a roar, like other chain weapons, but a hissing purr. The monstrous glaive, with a shaft of black iron and ridged ceramite, bore a crystalline power source at its head, capable of generating an explosion if necessary. Like the others born on the planet Nostramo, Jago Sevatarion possessed a refined face and completely black eyes unaccustomed to bright light. After his singular glance at the Emperor, the warrior had to spend 7 weeks in the Apothecarian, recovering his lost sight. The wait for healing seemed so unbearable to the Space Marine that he was ready to demand augmentic eyes instead of those which, as he said, were filled with molten gold. The demeanour and appearance of the first captain were designed to instill fear in all who gazed upon him. The warrior's midnight blue armour was covered with the flayed skins of enemies, and the faceplate of his helmet depicted a grinning skull. Furthermore, the Battle Brothers awarded Sevatar the nickname Prince of Crows. The first captain himself explained this title with a jest, allegedly highlighting a connection between him, the multitude slain by his hand, and the birds that feast on the fallen. After the onset of the Horus heresy, the Night Lord's legion, along with their Primarch, sided with the traitors. This could not be considered a surprise, as the sons of Kurz had never particularly adhered to the ideals of the Emperor. During the Great Crusade, they carried out tasks for the effective compliance of worlds, though they did so only because the Night Lord's inherent penchant for violence could be unleashed within the framework of war. When Horus declared his new views, neither Kurz, who had foreseen the uprising, nor his legionnaires felt any desire to stand alongside the defenders of humanity. The Night Lord's first significant battle in the era of the heresy was the combat on Istvan V, where the Iron Hands, Salamanders and Raven Guard were to withstand several opponent legions, some of whom had not yet declared their treachery. The meeting of the traitor Primarchs held on the eve of this battle went down in history as the gathering where the famous phrase, "Death to the false emperor," was first uttered. The author of this expression and the first to vocalize it was Sevatarion. Before saying this, the legionnaire listened to Lorgar's lengthy speech who spoke of how the deceitful atheistic ideology of the Imperium could not possibly bring prosperity and protection from Xenos to humanity, as it was founded on a dangerous deception and thus deserved destruction. The Primarch of the Word-Bearers promised to build a new Imperium atop the ruins of his father's realm, where enlightenment, faith and justice would reign supreme. Despite all of Lorgar's words and the fact that Horus had been declared the true Emperor of humanity, Sevatar did not rush into this new faith, and, as in the past, did not place common goals above his own. The first captain of the Night Lords led his elite company at Istvan V, entrusted with a crucial task by the Primarch to prevent Corvus Corax from escaping the encirclement. What transpired on the surface remains a mystery to this day, but it is known for certain that after the battle, under Sevatarian's command was Alastor Rushel, one of the captains of the Raven Guard. It is unclear why the son of a loyal Primarch effectively became a thrall to the Raven Prince, whether some sorcery was involved or it was simply a case of betrayal. Yet, from that day on, Alastor Rushel, who had been deprived of his tongue under equally mysterious circumstances, served as a devoted warrior to Sevatar, elevated by him to the highest ranks of the Legion. Nevertheless, the first captain did not succeed in achieving the task set by the Primarch to contain Corvus. For this failure, Sevatar stained his armor's gloves crimson, although Conrad Kurz did not issue specific orders regarding it. The tradition of staining hands the colour of arterial blood stemmed from the past on Nostromo. On the planet, it was customary that if a member of a criminal clan somehow earned the status of a traitor or fool, but could still be of use, the skin on their hand was tattooed red as a sign of doom, and the disgraced individual was sentenced to execution, deferred until they fulfilled their final duty. Within the Legion, the tradition barely transformed. And Astartes, who earned the Primarch's disappointment, would stain their armor gloves red and continue to fight, unaware of the exact moment when Conrad Kurz might decide to kill them. It is thought that the later practice of the Ultramarines to create red helmets for errant space marines was borrowed from the Night Lords. However, as with much else, Guilliman's sons lacked the cruelty to condemn those marked in such a manner to execution. After the battle at Istvan V, not only the status of Sevatar changed, but also his attitude towards his brothers from other traitor legions. Having realized that the Gal Vorbak of the Word-Bearers were demon hosts with their flesh and ceramite merging into a new unnatural form, Jago Sevatarian felt revulsion towards his former comrades and spat at the feet of Argel Tal, who was about to congratulate the Night Lord on victory. The realization that some legions were surrendering to the power of the dark gods, allowing them to mutilate their very essence, provoked in Sevatarian an overt hostility towards those he once considered allies. Horus's next command sent the Night Lords to the eastern fringe of the galaxy, to the Traumas sector, where the 8th Legion was to delay the Dark Angels and prevent them from approaching Terra with reinforcements. This brutal campaign, known in the annals as the Traumas Crusade, lasted just under 3 years, during which the sons of Kurz ravaged the Segmentum Ultima, while the Primarch himself attempted to sway Lion L. Johnson to Horus's side. To achieve this, the Night Haunter planned to break his brother both morally and physically during their meeting. In addition to the Primarchs, their most trusted warriors, including Jago Sevatarian, also attended the negotiations. The Astartes of the warring legions immediately began to hurl insults at each other and their mothers. But Sevatar found amusement in the curses of the Lion's sons, who had learned a few words of Nostraman specifically for the occasion. He even agreed to tell his former brothers the shameful reasons why his gloves were coloured differently from the rest of his armour. After hearing his speech, and learning that traitors or fools were sentenced to a deferred death, Corswin, the first blade of the Dark Angels Legion, asked Sevatar which of those two options he considered himself. The Crow Prince replied that he belonged to both. However, the almost friendly atmosphere of the meeting dissipated when Conrad Kurz insulted the Primarch of the First Legion, who in turn struck the Night Haunter in the face. This escalated into a fierce duel, at the end of which the Astartes of both sides had to carry their wounded fathers away. By the next meeting of the two legions' leaders, the Dark Angels set a meticulously planned ambush for the Night Lords, disabling about a quarter of their fleet. Besides this, Lion L. Johnson mortally wounded Conrad Kurz, who survived this battle solely because Sevatar managed to evacuate his father onto a ship. Sacrificing nearly all of his Atramentas for this, the Crow Prince orchestrated a successful escape, concealing the remnants of the broken legion in the void. Yet despite the efforts of the apothecaries, the wounded Night Haunter did not regain consciousness, remaining on the brink of life and death as the legion rapidly disintegrated. Some Astartes believed it right to continue following Horus's orders, but the Crow Prince deemed loyalty to the War Master as insignificant as fidelity to the Emperor. He saw value only in his genetic father, though he did not feel sentimental attachment to him like some other Astartes, and did not suffer seeing Kurz's wounded body. Sevatar faced a choice: to allow his treacherous brothers to split up or force the Primarch to awaken. Acting against his convictions, Jago decided for the first time in his life to use the psychic gift he despised. The warrior knew that by unleashing these nearly forgotten abilities, he would never be the same again, and yet he was willing to make this sacrifice to save Kurz. He immersed himself in the consciousness of the Night Haunter, intending to coax him back to his duties, but instead engaged in a debate with his father that led to irritation. Sevatar mocked Kurz's methods of uniting Nostromo, pointing out that the Primarch had never undertaken any constructive activities, keeping the population in human boundaries solely due to his own terrifying figure. The first captain rejected Kurz's assertion that he had chosen the only true path. In Sevatar's opinion, the Primarch took the simplest route, and for that reason none of his achievements could endure long. The Astartes accused his father of lying, provoking anger and even an attempt to strangle him. However, the unpleasant conversation led to the necessary result. Kurz awoke and once again led the Legion. Barely regaining his senses, the Primarch decided to teleport to the flagship of the Dark Angels to conclude the confrontation in yet another duel with Lion L. Johnson. Sevatar disapproved of this decision. The Night Lord's fleet could perform a warp jump and escape from a stronger enemy, but Kurz was interested in nothing other than a personal victory over his brother. He did not consider that the ship crews were disoriented by concussions. The Space Marines were exhausted and wounded, and only 12 warriors remained from the elite squad. Observing the situation, Sevatar concluded that the reason for the Loyalists' victories was their adherence to discipline, which prevented them from interfering with each other and making unreasonable decisions. In the subsequent battle, the Night Lord suffered yet another defeat. The Primarch managed to escape, while the first captain ended up among the few captured. Sevatarian was overwhelmed not by enemies, but by his newly awakened psyker abilities. During the battle he lost consciousness, but not before being glad that he would most likely die. However, he was not executed, but thrown into a cell, the metallic walls of which he broke through in just 15 minutes. Like the other imprisoned Night Lords, Sevatar used the acid of Betcha's gland, but the Dark Angels noticed his manipulations at the moment when the aperture became sufficient to accommodate a Space Marine. The Raven Prince informed his overseers that the large rats were probably to blame, after which the son of the lion transferred him to a cell with reinforced walls. The prisoner was kept in complete darkness, but even this did not alleviate the constant pain from his awakened gift. Sevatarian saw and heard the ghosts of the people he had once killed, and once again, as in childhood, began to suffer from fits and convulsions. Once a day he was fed a nutrient-rich porridge that had a chemical taste, but Sevatar thanked the Dark Angels for it, claiming that each new portion was even tastier than the previous one. The darkness of the prison cell did not save the warrior from an endless headache, but relief came from an unexpected source. One of the voices sounding in the first captain's mind began to bring relief. It was a little girl, whom Sevatar perceived as dead. She called herself Altani Shedu and addressed the Space Marine Yargo by the name he forbade anyone else from using. Her voice, one of many that invaded his consciousness, daily asked the Space Marine about his well-being, about the past, posed childishly naive questions about the Legion and the fate of Nostromo. Believing the girl to be dead, Sevatar unabashedly revealed to her more than he could have ever allowed himself to say to anyone else in his entire life. However, when he asked Altani about how she died, it turned out that misunderstanding had prevailed between them all this time. She was alive and was aboard the Dark Angel's flagship as an astropath. The child's power was such that despite her young age, she was already the second voice of the choir, only surpassed in might by the chief astropath. The psychic torments of the Night Lord affected the other psychers and hindered their work. For this reason, Altani decided to alleviate Sevatar's suffering by intervening. She explained to the warrior that psychic abilities could not be eliminated, and attempts to suppress them would only cause harm. The girl could not teach Sevatar to use the gift, but she was capable of calming the psyker's tormented mind. Altani's intentions were without malice, only a desire to improve the choir's performance and help the prisoner, but due to her youth she could not evaluate how terrifying the consequences of contact with the enemy of the Dark Angels could be. During one of the conversations, Altani disappeared and did not reappear for a week. During this time, Sevatar suffered from headaches and occasionally heard distant screams. He did not respond to the appearance of his jailers, did not eat the food they brought, and his mind was on the edge of reality. When the girl returned, the Night Lord learned that all these days she was tortured, punished for communicating with the captive. Sevatarian immersed himself in Altani's experiences, feeling the horror of the helpless and blinded girl, unable even to shield herself from the falling blows. The leader of the astropathic choir beat the child with a force whip, breaking her spine and depriving her of the ability to move. However, even after this, Altani remained useful to the First Legion, for singing the warp-transmitted song did not require legs. Sevatar asked the girl to tell him everything about her abusers, but she appeared in his mind not for this purpose, but to warn him of the danger threatening the warrior himself. Despite her maimed body, Altani's mind reached out to the Night Lord, not asking for help, but offering it. When the Dark Angels came for the Prince of Crows, intending to transfer him to a prison ship to execute him, the girl immobilized the Lion's Space Marines, demonstrating to her friend how powerful she was. This allowed Sevatar to grab a bolter and kill the guards, paving his way to the combat starships, aboard one of which he could escape. However, the Night Lord rejected the escape plan proposed by the girl. Instead, he seized a chainsword from a fallen Dark Angel and set out to seek the hall of the astropathic choir. Sevatar could not leave the Lion's flagship. Justice had to be served first. For long hours he navigated through the ship's maintenance air ducts, and the girl assisted him to the best of her ability. Eventually the warrior reached the pod where Altani lay in an agnostic slumber. Looking at the mutilated child, pierced with more needles and wires than could be counted, Sevatar realized that every second spent by her side was a detriment to him. yet he did not move. He wanted to touch the glass of the chamber, on the other side of which were the child's fingers, but refrained, understanding that the print of his bloody hand would harm Altani even more. However, the Raven Prince did not come to the astropathic hall for a sentimental encounter. His interest was the adjacent pod, where the leader of the choir resided. Appearing as an old man, but in truth a 30-year-old man, the astropath was startled when the hands of the Space Marine wrenched him from his slumber. Sevatar informed the man that he had come for him, then began slowly strangling the astropath with the power whip that had crippled the youngest in his choir. The warrior did not hasten to kill the man, prolonging his agony as much as possible. He broke the neck and disposed of the lifeless body only after the Dark Angels stormed into the hall. Sevatar announced to them that he represented justice, judgment, and punishment, then surrendered. By choosing justice over escape, the Night Lord once again found himself in a dark cell, but now he was no longer plagued by headaches and the whispers of the dead. Sevatar saw the infinite space between worlds, the farthest depths of the galaxy, and the dangers lurking within, while the guiding voice of the girl once again echoed in his mind, bringing a smile. There is information suggesting that Jago Sevatarian met his death in the final battle for Terra, after which the position of leader of the elite Terminator squad was taken by Zo Sahal. However, not all the Terminators were willing to follow the native of the throne world, leading to the squad's disbandment. Sevatarian's death is indirectly confirmed by testimonies reported to Conrad Kurz at the moment when his sanity had almost completely unravelled and he demanded the presence of his first captain. But there is also another perspective asserting that at the time of the 41st millennium, the Raven Prince is still alive. The sources are contradictory, and it is difficult to say which is true, especially in light of the fact that Sevatarian was sentenced to death by his own Primarch, who valued the execution of just punishment above all. However, whatever mystery surrounds the ultimate fate of Jago Sevatarian, it is impossible to dismiss the possibility that the most renowned and controversial Space Marine of the Night Lords will re-emerge in the annals of human history. Throughout all times, people have achieved great feats under the influence of the most noble ideas and sentiments. Some sacrificed themselves for the glory of the motherland, while others achieved the impossible to save their loved ones. It is difficult to imagine how strong love and loyalty can be in the heart of a warrior who embarks on a journey to death for the happiness of those who are weaker. But is there a feeling capable of overshadowing everything else? Can something intangible be born in a person's soul, something powerful enough to destroy the world? Today we learn about Luther, the greatest knight who surrendered his most cherished possession to the ravages of his own envy. The harsh conditions on the planet Caliban, where Luther was born and where the Primarch Lionel Johnson would later be discovered, forged a unique, chivalric civilization. This forest-covered world was regularly shaken by earthquakes and landslides, while wild creatures lurking between colossal trees terrorized its inhabitants. The chief enemies of the people on Caliban were the great beasts, hideous monsters of enormous size. It can now be said with certainty that these creatures, like many other strange phenomena on the planet, were caused by the influence of the Immaterium. But in those distant times, the population of Caliban could not suspect such a thing, and therefore regarded the great beasts as an inevitable evil. The only citadel on Caliban that never fell before the onslaught of the monsters was Aldoruk, a fortress where young knights were raised and trained. The Order, created within the walls of Aldoruk, an alliance of warriors who chose the fate of defending the local inhabitants, stood against the great beasts and moved to monster-attacked regions at the call of the people. The local culture supported the desire of the youngest members of society to become defenders of the people, and thus many young men and women set out annually on what was called the quest. During this event, a young warrior had to single-handedly track down and kill a great beast in the forests and then bring the slain monster's corpse back to the fortress. Young hearts were eager for battles from the earliest age, but the knights did not encourage recklessness. Only those of a certain age and who had already proven their bravery were permitted to engage in the quest. Luther set out for the head of his first great beast earlier than anyone before him. However, despite his being less than 15 years old, his parents supported him. The young knight did not leave the fortress alone. He was accompanied by another young warrior, who, like Luther, intended to slay her first monster. The peril of the quest lay not only in battling the beasts, as Caliban was also home to wild animals whose encounters could end just as grimly. Adding to the horror were non-material entities. On one of the first nights of their journey, Luther and his companion encountered a whole army of ghosts, which for some reason paid no attention to the young people. Deep in the forest, the young warriors parted ways, as the first battle with a monster demanded absolute solitude. Luther returned to the fortress with the slain great beast, and was subsequently accepted into the chivalric order. The warrior revealed himself to be a talented individual, whose merits were far above the accolades bestowed upon him. Luther possessed phenomenal charisma, which established him as an exceptional leader, commander, and hunter. According to unverified reports, during that period, the knight married a noblewoman named Fiona. 2 years after the wedding, his wife passed away during childbirth, though the child survived. It is speculated that Luther raised the daughter alone, whose fate remains a mystery to this day. The knight had more slain great beasts to his name than any other warrior in the history of Caliban. Contemporaries described him as an intelligent man, possessing a sense of humour, but also cold-bloodedness and wisdom. It was Luther who led the planet's society out of an internal crisis, and he would undoubtedly be remembered by future generations as the greatest hero of his time. Had he been born in any other era? Luther's tragedy was that he was born in the same period as another great warrior, against whose feats any mortal's act would remain unnoticed. On the day Luther met the young lion L. Johnson in the forests of Caliban and brought him to the people, he sealed his fate as the strongest warrior of the planet. During a hunt for one of the great beasts, a squad of knights of the Order, led by the young Luther, stumbled upon the corpse of a monster slain by someone else. It was supposed that the beast might have perished at the hands of its own kind, but instead of a second monster, the Order discovered a wounded youth. Many knights expressed a wish to kill the strange young man, whom they initially mistook for a fierce ape, but Luther protected the youth, recognizing dignity and intellect in his eyes. It was then that the greatest knight of Caliban first uttered the name of the Primarch, Lionel Johnson, which in the Gothic tongue of the planet meant Lion, Child of the Forest. Luther took the remarkable youth to Alderuk, where he raised and educated him as his own son. The Primarch quickly developed, and soon the relationship between him and his adopting knight grew into a strong friendship, akin to the bond that could form between two noble brothers. The warriors had different dispositions and distinct temperaments, yet they perfectly complemented each other. The inhabitants of Caliban wove legends of the exploits of Luther and the lion, and inspired by these stories, recruits filled the Order with an endless martial stream. Shortly after the Primarch's arrival in Alderuk, he and Luther called the knights to embark on a crusade against the great beasts to cleanse the planet once and for all from their vile infection. By taking the lion into the order, Luther sentenced himself to a life in his shadow. Many others, realizing the greatness of their newfound friend, might fall prey to the temptation of envy and begin to vie with the lion. But Luther was not like that. He devoted all his energy to ensuring the lion's plans came to fruition successfully and took no less responsibility for setbacks than the Primarch himself. The true brotherly devotion of Luther made him even more revered in the eyes of other knights, as such sincere and effortless friendship with a more powerful warrior required considerable inner strength and nobility. However, the closer the ultimate victory over the monsters occupying Caliban became, the more attention and applause were showered upon the lion. Luther humbly accepted his role as a mere witness alongside his great brother, shielding his soul from bitterness and envy. In the 10th and final standard year of the campaign against the great beasts, the Order, led by Lion L. Johnson, cleansed the planet of monsters and united all Caliban's military formations under its wing, except for the Lupus Knights. Under the leadership of Lord Sartana, this small order rose against the rapid changes in the world, which threatened to soon be completely cleansed of monsters. The Lupus Knights did not understand what fate awaited them after the completion of the Lion's Crusade, and could imagine no destiny other than fighting monsters. Therefore, in secret from everyone, Lord Sartana established a monster nursery within the Order's fortress, where the offspring of the great beasts were raised, trained, and later released into the wild. Since the appearance of the lion, the Knights of Caliban rarely waged war against each other. A case of personal animosity was considered acceptable to resolve in one of the forms of ritual combat. But these battles never escalated into a major military conflict. The situation where two knightly orders intended to doom their best warriors to battle against each other seemed unthinkable, and occurred less than once in several generations. However, the Order of the Lion and the Lupus Knights could not complete negotiations peacefully, as L. Johnson refused to listen to the envoys and simply declared war on the rebels. The Primarch gathered the majority of his warriors and went to storm the Lupus Knights' citadel. The Lion led a diversionary attack on the fortress's northern gates, while Luther commanded the main forces. Both sides suffered horrifying losses in this battle, but no consequences of the battle compared to the nightmare discovered by the Order in the citadel. The inner courtyard of the Lupus Knights' refuge resembled a menagerie with countless cages. Each monster in this nursery was a unique specimen of its kind, preserved for a loathsome purpose. The Knights of the Order were shocked by the encounter with the multitude of great beasts, but they were horrified not by the monsters, but by the people, who called themselves defenders of Caliban and secretly engaged in breeding monsters. When Lord Sartana realized that his hundreds of warriors could not defend the fortress against the armies of the Lion and Luther, he pulled a heavy lever, opening the exit from every cage. The Knights of the Order found themselves trapped, squeezed between the warriors of the citadel and the fierce monsters. In a moment the battle turned into a bloody madness, where beasts hurled soldiers high into the air and tore them apart. The vassals of Sartana retreated deeper into the fortress, hoping that the beast would do all the work for them. However, thanks to the coordinated actions of the Order and skillful command, this did not occur. The warriors of Lion and Luther annihilated the overwhelming part of the monsters and broke into the citadel. The Knights of Lupus could not hope for mercy, for they forfeited the right to it on the day they decided to spare the life of the first monstrous creature. Each member of the rebellious group was tracked down in the corridors of the fortress and killed. Realizing defeat, Lord Sartana attempted to preserve a shred of honor and did not surrender to the enemy. He pierced his heart with his own hunting knife. The triumph did not bring joy to Luther, and the return path to Alderach felt mournful to him. The knight's achievements went unnoticed in the shadow of the lion's deeds. The situation was worsened by the celebration, at which all present thanked only L. Johnson, and he, in turn, did not even think to reveal to those around him the significant role his friend played in the latest victory. Luther tried to convince himself he felt no real envy, yet it was on that very evening that the first crack appeared in his heart, which over the years turned into the great schism that tore apart the Legion and the planet. Shortly after the world was finally cleansed of the great beasts, the Emperor arrived on Caliban, having sensed the psychic energy of one of his sons. However, before the ruler of humanity descended, the Space Marines of the First Legion, created from the gene seed of Lion L. Johnson, had already landed on the surface. Their task was to demonstrate the power of the superhumans and the special fraternal unity that mortal knights of Caliban could not even dream of. The Lion was seized by the desire to unite the disparate orders under a single idea, and he expressed his consent to stand under the banners of the Imperium. Yet not everyone supported this vision. The fruit of this division went down in the history of Caliban. During the first meeting of the Emperor with his son, opponents of unification attempted an assassination on the life of the ruler of humanity. Many ordinary inhabitants of the planet were terrified of a future under the Imperium's wing. Caliban was transformed from a wild, sparsely populated world into a factory-covered forge of young recruits. The advanced technology brought by the Emperor's expedition seemed like sorcery to the local population, but this was not the most frightening aspect. Knights, aspirants to the Order, and other young men went through the process of ascension to the Astartes. Those who successfully passed the trials became Space Marines of the First Legion, while the rest were formed into several divisions of the Imperial Army. Many knights perceived the ascension to Astartes as yet another competition, and did not suspect that they were participants in an experiment meant to demonstrate the genetic purity of Caliban's warriors. Like others, Luther was mobilized into the First Legion to continue accompanying the Lion in his conquests. However, the knight was too old and did not fit the role of a neophyte. Instead of undergoing the classic transformation procedure, Luther underwent a series of genetic and surgical procedures that enhanced his endurance. He gained incredible strength for a mortal, became much taller and faster, yet he did not reach the level of a true Astartes. It was challenging for Luther to accept this fact. He was surrounded by those who had only recently served him as squires or junior knights, but now all of them were far stronger and more powerful than he was. Despite his own mental struggles, Luther remained the closest friend and right-hand man of the Lion. He demonstrated his value daily through wise decisions and advice, without which the Primarch would struggle. Yet despite his successes, Luther could not shake the inner conviction that those around him looked down on him simply because he failed to become a full-fledged Space Marine. Since meeting the Primarch, Luther's life had turned into an endless confrontation with himself. Good feelings toward his friend battled with envy in his heart, while ambition and pride increasingly distanced the knight from his own ideals. Shortly after joining the Great Crusade, the Fourth Expeditionary Fleet of the Dark Angels, led by the Primarch, commenced operations in orbit over the planet Sarosh, marking Luther's first serious test of loyalty. The world was recorded as having been brought to compliance by the White Scar's legions, and all that remained for the Lion was to finalize an agreement with the diplomats, confirmed by documents. However, the aristocracy ruling the planet deliberately postponed the meeting, citing various circumstances, yet verbally expressing a strong willingness to join the Imperium. The inhabitants of the planet appeared to be peaceful people with secular views, though imperial truth was, in reality, not aligned with them. The population secretly worshipped the entities of chaos and perceived the atheistic stance of the master of mankind as the embodiment of absolute evil. On the day of the meeting with Lionel Johnson, the High Lord of Sarosh expressed his beliefs while looking the Primarch straight in the eye. He loudly condemned the Emperor and claimed that no society could claim the status of righteous if it did not acknowledge the supremacy of the divine power. Hearing the secular doctrine brought by the conquerors for the first time, the world's inhabitants viewed the Emperor as a liar and a demon, a spawn of falsehood sent by dark spirits to destroy civilization. Enraged, the Lion cleaved the Lord in half, although the emissary's mission was designed to be suicidal from the start. At this time, Luther and the librarian Zahariel were located on the landing deck, planning to deploy to the planet's surface. Out of curiosity, the Knight suggested to the Space Marine to investigate the Saroshan envoy's shuttle. His interest was sparked by the fact that the ship was several thousand Terran years old, making it a unique relic from an ancient era. However, after inspecting the shuttle, an unexpected change occurred in Luther. He emerged onto the landing deck pale-faced and harshly commanded the librarian to return to his company. Zahariel departed, but the image of the enraptured commander gazing intently at the Sarosh ship lingered in the Psyker's mind. He disobeyed orders and went back to the deck to examine the shuttle himself. The librarian's abilities did not fail him. The planet's aristocracy sent not only a diplomat to the Lion's flagship, but also a nuclear bomb. The enemies intended to kill the Primarch and all their senior commanders of the Dark Angels, but Luther, having discerned their plans, said nothing about it. He appeared bewildered and could not clearly articulate his thoughts. As if possessed, Luther spoke to himself, and the Astartes heard his musings. The Knight spoke of seeing a chance to reclaim Caliban under his control, to once again become the best and strongest, never sharing glory with others again, to leave the shadow of his magnificent comrade. Zahariel interrupted Luther's pondering with words that his deeds were no less glorious than those of the Lion, but he merely smirked. In another era, he would have been a hero, for next to a Primarch, even the greatest of humans remains but a mortal. And how could the librarian know what it is like to be the most powerful warrior on the planet and suddenly lose that status? After solar decades of strong friendship, feelings entrapped in flesh, not of honor and self-control, finally broke free. Luther opened his heart, and the librarian understood that no one, not even the Knight himself until that day, suspected his true nature. To achieve his desire, Luther simply had to do nothing. Quietly leave the shuttle, telling no one of the danger. And that is exactly what he did. Ordered all subordinates capable of detecting the bomb to clear the deck, and then left himself. But with each step, memories invaded the treacherous mind. Memories where the noble Primarch proved himself a great commander and friend. The Knight realized that being a mere servant to the great Lion was an incredible honor, but he, Luther, was born the luckiest man in the galaxy, for it was he who was named a brother by the best of warriors. That day, the noble part of the Knight's soul triumphed, and he turned to Zahariel for help. Together, the two Dark Angels managed to jettison the bomb into open space, protecting the flagship from significant damage. The Lion's life was saved. The attack on the undeniable argument marked the beginning of full-scale war. Representatives of the Imperium, located in various parts of the planet, suddenly found themselves attacked by those they considered allies. The inhabitants of Sarosh cruelly rejected the teachings of the Emperor and all that he embodied. The world was shaken by numerous terrorist acts and drowned in blood. Lionel Johnson successfully stabilized the situation in orbit and then led the landing on the planet's surface. The Dark Angels swiftly cleansed the world of chaos cultists and several unborn. However, Despite the many brave sons who fought shoulder to shoulder in the Emperor's name, the Lion noticed that among the warriors, Luther was absent. The disappearance of the Primarch's closest friend and advisor could not go unnoticed by the other Dark Angels. Therefore, scarcely had the warriors returned aboard the indomitable Argument when the Lion issued an order that stunned the Legion. Luther and 500 seasoned Astartes were assigned to return to Caliban. This was explained by the influx of recruits from the Primarch's home planet being slower than necessary. The crusade was entering a new active phase, and according to the Lion, there was an urgent need for young warriors that only Luther could select. In defiance of the lofty words about an ostensibly honourable mission, the entire Legion's Astartes understood that the Primarch had sent his friend into exile. The sense of utter despondency was a crushing blow for Luther and each Space Marine returning home with him. None of these warriors bore a mark of disgrace on their bodies, but they all knew the shameful truth, which burned their proud hearts like corrosive acid. The Primarch had rejected them precisely when the Legion was in dire need of Space Marines. With this gesture, the Lion seemed to underline how insignificant Luther's and his warriors' contribution was to the cause of the Great Crusade. The Primarch wanted the one he called brother to realize that his merits were so negligible that chroniclers were unlikely to bother mentioning the knight's name in their annals, while the Legion's expedition would continue to achieve feats as if Luther had never existed. However, there were those who decided to express support for the Lion's disgraced friend. Callus Typhon of the Death Guard and Erebus of the Word-Bearers secretly approached Luther, declaring that they considered him a mighty warrior undeservedly deprived of glory. In addition to words of support and overt flattery, the Space Marines also brought with them a book by Lorgar Aurelian, in which the Primarch spoke of the nature of the warp. The conspirators were confident that Luther would take their side and were proven right. He took Lorgar's book, as well as several treatises written by Erebus. The Knight of Caliban sensed something amiss in this interaction with the suspicious Astartes, but decided that it was better for him to be cursed in the future than to perish now. The official reason for the separation from the Crusade was titled "An Honourable Mission Necessary for the Reinforcement of the Legion." Yet the fact that each of the dispatched Space Marines was born on Caliban pointed to something else. Luther and his warriors returned home deep into the night, and no one came out to meet them. There was neither a jubilant crowd nor even a single person genuinely pleased by the Astartes' return. The truth was evident. The Lion would never send away his declared brother and valuable adviser without serious cause. Luther could have been exiled for only one reason. The Primarch wanted to send him as far away from himself as possible. By sending his friend and his warriors back to Caliban, Lionel Johnson declared that he would soon visit the home planet. Yet this did not occur. For the next 5 solar decades, the Primarch never once spoke of Luther, nor did he respond to any of his messages. Some speculated that the Lion's icy indifference was due to a quarrel over a near-exploding shuttle in the orbit of Sarosh. Others believed that Luther was punished for long-held envy and cowardice. The Primarch did not wish to clarify these rumours, and over time they faded on their own. The story of the exile remained in the memory of the Legionnaires only as a warning for newcomers. Do not make mistakes, for if you die in the eyes of Lionel Johnson, you will never rise again. For 50 years, Luther successfully conducted recruitment and training of neophytes for the Dark Angels. But over time, his peaceful life began to be disturbed by uprisings among the mortal population of Caliban. Studying the causes of these events, the librarian Zahariel realized that the world was once again suffering from attacks by great beasts. The situation was aggravated by a rebellion of the Order's knights, who believed that the lion had betrayed the planet. The defenders of Caliban did not come to these conclusions on their own. At the center of the conspiracy were several Terran sorcerers serving the dark gods. In addition, Luther spent long hours in his secret library studying forbidden books. Years ago, he had hidden from the lion what kept dangerous treatises alive, and this became his first fatal mistake. Written by the adepts of chaos, the books captivated Luther's mind to such an extent that he devoted all his free time to reading, completely forgetting about sleep and rest. In those days, the warrior also communicated with a minor warp demon, whom he named Escarole. This word was a distorted form of one of Caliban's curses, indicating not the most trusting relationships between the demon and the knight. Immaterium beings had long been known on Caliban, as was the knowledge that they were terrible and repulsive. Luther used Escarole as an oracle, binding it within a special pentagram from which the demon could not escape. Bound by spell and word, the Neverborn could not lie in its predictions but did everything possible to ensure its words were misunderstood. Escarole spoke of betrayal within the ranks of the Dark Angels, and this drove Luther insane. The demon claimed that among the knight's closest advisors were enemies, but did not name specific names. It evaded direct answers, mocked the warrior's impatience, and spoke only phrases that could be understood ambiguously. After another set of words of punishment, Escarole delivered to Luther the clearest prophecy it could muster. In the cold shadow of Alderuk, where in the glory of past days knights met each other, something else is heard now. Rebels at secret meetings greet without words in the gloom, condemning to execution with silence about the breach of oath. But in their silent trust a pompous traitor exists, betray for the last time, wisely considered the mistakes of the past. Vanity will conceal the truth, doubt will overcome loyalty, and friends will find no solace. Harm is done, too late to beg. Dreams fall irreversibly, hopes fade in the clang of the day, and the false deed committed by the sons shall not be forgiven. Upon hearing this, the knight began to ponder who among his comrades was capable of treachery. But only after centuries did it become clear to Luther that the traitors were all, including himself. When the news of War Master Horus's rebellion against the Emperor reached Caliban, Luther declared the planet's independence from Terra and Lionel Johnson. The knight was convinced that he was acting in the interests of his homeland. The main forces of the Dark Angels, under the guidance of the Primarch, made a significant contribution to the defense of the Imperium, but at the finale of the heresy, the Lion nonetheless arrived on Terra too late and could not protect the throne world from the traitorous forces. After Horus was destroyed and the Emperor was confined to the Golden Throne, the First Legion decided to return to Caliban. Contrary to expectations, their homeworld greeted the Dark Angels with fire from the surface. Pulling the fleet back to a safe distance, L. Johnson endeavoured to discover what had happened and found the result of Luther's wrathful actions. All the Astartes of the planet, as well as the new recruits, were turned against their Primarch. The Lion was right in determining that such circumstances could only be caused by the influence of chaos, and yet the corruption would not have entered the heart of his friend without a deep-seated grudge. L. Johnson ordered an orbital bombardment of Caliban to break the planet's defences. Then the Primarch led the troops to the surface and attacked the Order's citadel, where he battled his former friend. In this battle, Luther had already been blessed by the dark gods, and to his delight he could finally match the Lion in might. Even so, the Primarch managed to wound Luther and would have surely killed him, but he stopped. The Lion lacked the emotional strength to destroy the man he once considered a brother and mentor. Luther took advantage of this weakness and mortally wounded his friend, but was also unable to deliver the final blow. After the traitor saw the pain reflected on the lion's face, it was as if a veil had lifted from his eyes, angering the gods of chaos. They unleashed the energy of the warp upon Caliban, tearing the planet apart. Consequently, the fallen warriors who had served under the traitor were scattered across time and space. The only remaining part of the planet was the fortress of the Order, which later became known as the Rock, where the Lion and Luther fought. The Dark Angels entered it and captured the Broken Knight, but the Primarch was never found. These disgraceful events, when the First Legion destroyed itself, are known only to the Emperor and the Dark Angels. The Sons of the Lion kept this secret in fear that one day an outsider would learn of their terrible shame. For long millennia, Luther was held within a stasis field on the fragment of the planet. On the walls of his cell were inscribed the most powerful protective runes known to man. For centuries, the great masters of the Dark Angels used Luther as an oracle, though his mind, corrupted by chaos, frequently erred or attempted to deceive. In rare moments of clarity, he did speak the truth about future events or the locations of the hidden fallen. Since the day of Caliban's destruction, each new chapter master of the Order has endeavored to gain recognition from the heretic and to unravel the madness that troubled him, yet none were able to achieve their goal. The only words that Luther repeated time and again during such moments were a delusion that he needed no penance because the Lionel Johnson would soon return and absolve his friend of his sins himself. After the emergence of the Great Rift and the fall of Cadia, the Rock found itself in a part of the galaxy cut off from Terra and the light of the Astronomicon. Shortly thereafter, the Dark Angels' chapter citadel was attacked by a Chaos army led by the demon prince Marbus. The battles raged across all levels of the planet's fragment, including the Great Halls, the labyrinthine sublevels, and the dungeons that delved deep into the rock. When the battle reached its climax, the enemy forces unexpectedly vanished, achieving nothing but senseless slaughter and destruction. Such was recorded in the official chronicles of the chapter. Yet in truth, the entire battle had been merely a diversion, during which the Chaos minions executed their true mission. They freed Luther, the secret prisoner of the Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels. It is impossible to say precisely where the escaped traitor has gone, but some sons of the Lionel Johnson fear that hiding in the shadows of the Great Rift, Luther is assembling a legion of the fallen to one day shake the imperium of man and subject the galaxy to the dark gods. The stories of betrayal remind us that even the brightest stars can dim, and greatness can turn to dust if the duty is forgotten. Yet every fall is also a lesson, calling for eternal vigilance and faith in the light, even when faced with the deepest darkness. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell to not miss new stories about the grim future of the Warhammer 40,000 universe.